start. Well, it's very nice to introduce this lecture on diamond vault and Zoe Opacic. The events list referred to the modernity of the diamond vault, and I guess, I would agree with this, and that at least within the context of the AA, it alludes to concepts which are now quite common, such as complex geometry and folding and generative forms, iterative process, and I could go on that way. I was actually in Bohemia about 2 years ago, and I visited the church of Sobeslav, and there are, I think, a few pictures upstairs, and it might be in the lecture. And for me, the thing which was by far overwhelming was the fact that they were extremely beautiful, and in addition to that, quite unknown in the West. The only picture which I had seen in a publication in the English language, translation from the German, was a black and white picture of one example. That is to say, it hasn't been published near here. And so I came back from the Czech Republic, and there was this idea that we might actually do something about diamond vault. And we were very lucky. There was maybe a chance in 1,000 that Zoe Opacic would exist in London. And Zoe is a historian of medieval architecture, and she specialized in addition in medieval architecture in Central Europe, so she has written on more extensive subjects. She is also fluent in Czech, which was, of course, of great assistance. She has taught and also graduated with a PhD from the Courtauld Institute, and she has been a research fellow in Cambridge, and she is currently a lecturer at Birkbeck College on related subjects. Now, also, I shouldn't forget to say that she is the author of the essay in the book which she and the AA have put together. I think a rather attractive book with also beautiful photographs taken by Subar from the AA, and I can only very strongly recommend it. So, over to you. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and of course I have to thank personally Irene for supporting and initiating this project and for introducing a sort of historical perspective to the AA and to architectural history that is being taught here, to of course the exhibitions department who put together this splendid exhibition upstairs, to Subar in particular for her wonderful photographs, and to the publications department who've produced really no time at all a wonderful looking book that I'm particularly proud of, so thank you all very much. I have to apologize also for the fact that you're going to see lots of vaults tonight, probably more than you ever wanted, and hear some rather unpronounceable names, but hopefully by the end of this evening's lecture it will start to make sense. So let's begin, and hopefully my rather old-fashioned slide technology will work. Will it? Could we have the lights off, or is there something here that I need to do? Vaults, most architectural historians would agree, are one of the defining features of medieval architecture. The construction of stone vaults at prodigious heights is probably the greatest technical achievement of an era long before the advances of the industrial age. More than mere structural additions, vaults are a dominant part of a complex system of interlocking members which constitute a medieval building. They're also perceived as an essential component of its stylistic physiognomy. Most students of architecture would readily recognize a Romanesque church by its barrel or groin vault, and I'm showing you Toulouse, Saint-Senani in Toulouse on the right with its large barrel vault erected over the nave. On the other hand, rib vaults in conjunction with pointed arches and flying buttresses, as you see here at Saint-Denis outside Paris, are identified as principal features of Gothic style. In his recently updated seminal volume on Gothic architecture, Paul Frankel went further. The Gothic style, he wrote, evolved from within Romanesque church architecture when diagonal ribs were added to the groin vault. Frankel's statement, let me just forward this a little bit so that you can see a groin vault here at Tornos and Amiens Cathedral on the right-hand side. Now, Frankel's statement may seem too categorical considering the stylistic ambivalence of early rib-vaulted churches. However, his argument that three-dimensional and diagonally placed ribs brought a new optical quality to building design rather than any outright structural advantage still has weight. Oh, that's much better. While the debate about the structural necessity of ribs still continues to this day, their aesthetic role seems to grow exponentially throughout the Gothic period. This is Tewkesbury Abbey. In short, from their early development in the 12th century, ribs remained, as a rule, a constituent element of Gothic vault design. But every rule has its exceptions. Today, I will focus on one unusual instance of Gothic vault design, which stands outside the canon and which has until now received little attention in Western scholarship. It will be very clear to you from the outset which are actually Sue's photographs and which are antediluvian slides taken from books published before 1975, like this view of mice, and this is, of course, Sue Barr's slide and photograph. So, the origins of this new style are in Saxony, where in 1471 Arnold von Westphalen, court architect to Albrecht and Ernest Wettin, began the work on the new palace in Meissen. In the course of 30 years, the new structure gradually replaced an older medieval castle with something more befitting the Wettins' large fortune and princely status. The ostentatious exterior of Albrechtsburg, as the palace came to be known, with its large decorative frame windows, sheer baling gables, and spire staircases, leaves us in no doubt about the representative nature of the new residence, and you can see all these details here, the staircase, the gables, etc. However, Master Arnold's most innovative and unexpected architectural designs are to be found inside the palace walls. The spacious public rooms, staircases and alcoves are vaulted exclusively by a series of dramatic and sharply projecting ceilings known evocatively as diamond or cell vaults on account of their faceted gem-like surfaces. In their earliest manifestation in the Albrechtsburg's Great Hall, which you see on the right, diamond vaults constructed in brick are still carried by stone ribs, which spring directly from freestanding and half-engaged piers. So these are the freestanding and the half-engaged. The segments of the vault they delineate are not the usual spherical webs, but three-dimensional triangular rhomboidal cells, which give the entire surface a strange origami-like effect of multiple folds. Although the ribs themselves are given similar diamond pattern in the vaults and piers, in other parts of the palace they're abandoned altogether in favor of exposed groins or ridges. The ribless quality of diamond vaults seems at first to revert to the simplicity of Romanesque and early Gothic groin vaults. They also bring to mind segmental domes and diamond-shaped squinches found in Islamic and Spanish architecture as early as the 10th century. In fact, both these examples, the Spanish one of the Capilla de los Reyes in Valencia here on the left, and this example from Bijapur in India from the 17th century, and this is from the 15th, are older, obviously, but there are early examples to be found too. Yet none of these remote examples provide the most convincing parallel for Arnold's invention. Diamond vaults are a product of a growing interest in experimentation with geometrical forms, and in particular with the novel system of vaulting shared by many late Gothic architects. The ability of vaults to alter the visual impact of interiors was particularly explored by the English and German architects in the 13th and 14th centuries. The builders of English cathedrals gradually abandoned the simple quadripartite vault in favor of more decorative designs by, for example, treating the entire vault as an extension of the window and reform designs. You see that here in the choir of Wells, or evoking timber structures in stone, as at Bristol Cathedral. Peter Parler, the most influential German architect of the late Middle Ages, who was responsible for the choir of Prague Cathedral, introduced net and star patterns into his vaults and infused the interiors with a novel spatial dynamic. And also remember this pendant boss, it will become relevant later. Stone vaults no longer conformed to the strict bay divisions of early architecture, but were given their own geometric and decorative autonomy. Despite these innovations, the basic structure of the medieval vault remained relatively simple. The intricate mesh of ribs splayed across the surface of the vault often concealed an almost barrel-like structure underneath. Arnold von Westphalen and his followers took that principle to its extreme and devised a ceiling of prismatic hollows, where the main aesthetic effect is created not by the decorative interplay of web and rib, but by a contrasting play of light and dark across its concave surface. Nevertheless, Arnold's initial reluctance to eliminate ribs completely may be a reflection of his creative background. The separation of vault cells and their ribs was a gradual process which began in German architecture a few decades earlier. The vaults of Nicholas Esseler the Elder and the Younger, and of their circle in Dinkelsbuhl, Nördlingen and Basel, which you see the cloister of Basel on the left, already saw some of the earliest experiments in the process of dispensing with ribs by separating certain ribs from their nearest cells and giving the latter autonomy. And what I mean is that here you can see that certain vault cells meet without a rib, and this is because of differences in the steepness of the vault, of the ribs, especially the intersection between diagonal and transverse ribs. This is also the system used in the Albrechtsburg Great Hall, though with the omission of a number of ribs. These minutiae of stylistic comparison provide a helpful means of establishing formative influence on Arnold's inventions. Otherwise, very little is known about the Meissen architect and what may have inspired his original creations. We know even less what persuaded Duke Albrecht to entrust Arnold with such an important project, but the architect was clearly determined to make his mark from the outset. As the seat of an elector of the Holy Roman Empire, Albrechtsburg was intended to emulate the Gothic splendor of the courts in Prague and Marienburg, just to give you a sort of evocative and totally post-1945 view of Marienburg. From an architectural point of view, the dignity of the office that the palace was meant to personify, and here's the ground plan, was conveyed almost entirely by vaults, and you see them on the plan here in various rooms on the first floor. So it was conveyed almost entirely by vaults, which transformed what could have been a series of similar-looking spaces into something unexpected. In addition, the design of Albrechtsburg included two other important devices, the internal buttress system and the curtain arch. The drawing of buttresses, which you can see here on the plan, inside the structure was an ingenious way of creating an interrupted facade. Deep recesses between buttresses were converted internally into generous window niches with characteristic outward radiating arches, or the so-called curtain arches, you can just see them here. Combined with the cell vaults, the overall effect is that of constantly shifting tectonic planes. The interior seems to recede before the spectator's eyes in a series of angular layers. The creative potential of the new vaults is probably demonstrated most vividly in the design for the great spiral case, the Wendelstein on the right. Here, the regular prismatic cells of the vault grow directly out of the stretched triple newel shafts, these ones here. The geometric forms of the vault masterfully contrast the swirl of the staircase and seem to become more crystalline and abstract as they lose their supportive ribs and fan out into a series of arches over the square window frames. Incidentally, this is the Wendelstein on the ground plan. Arnold understood that the best way to maximize the visual effect of abstract elements was to juxtapose them to their opposites, the soft features of ribs, balustrades, and window frames. It is also clear that the architect drew on his knowledge of an entire spectrum of Gothic forms, and especially those hitherto found in church architecture. They probably included Brunswick Cathedral, here it is, of the late 1460s, which offers a particularly compelling parallel. In the north aisle of the church, ribs wind their way like cables around the piers and span the entire structure, creating a continuing sense of movement. But as at Albrechtsburg, the rounder forms of the piers and ribs flow into the geometric forms of the sharply projecting net vault. And the windows are set into rectangular frames, which you can't see here, with depressed arches, evocative of the flattened window openings at Albrechtsburg. So there are a lot of details which seem to suggest that Arnold actually knew or possibly even worked on Brunswick Cathedral before arriving to Meissen. But we don't have any documentary evidence for this. Now, had the story of diamond vaults ended there, the Wettin Palace could have been dismissed as a one-off event, ingenious in its conceptual logic, but too idiosyncratic to be repeated. The work on the residence continued until 1525, some decades after Arnold von Westphalen's death, but the new form of vaulting introduced proved immediately popular. Within decades, diamond vaults spread from central Germany to eastern Prussia, Poland, Bohemia, now the Czech Republic, Upper Hungary, now present Slovakia, and Austria, soon reaching the eastern edges of Gothic Europe in the Baltic states and Lithuania. There are several reasons which could account for this swift dissemination. The Wettins' prestige and their large network of political and dynastic connections, especially in Bohemia and Prussia, certainly played a part. But it is undoubtedly the stark, modern quality of the vaults themselves, where spatial geometry is applied to create a unique visual effect, which was behind their instant appeal in the 15th century as much as it is today. Diamond vaults demonstrate the vitality of Gothic architecture at the end of the 15th century and its ability to reinvent itself. The creative flourish of Master Arnold and his followers defies the perception that late Northern European Gothic was an outdated affair, trailing behind the latest classical trends developed by the Renaissance architects in Italy. Diamond vaults appear most commonly in a non-religious context or are associated with rich secular patrons, mirroring a general shift from religious to secular patronage. This trend was accelerated by the growing urbanization and gentrification of many corners of Central Europe, such as southern Bohemia and East Prussia, especially Gdańsk. Nevertheless, the creative agency of the architect is also a crucial factor. Bernard Rudowski's categorization of diamond vaults among the non-pedigreed vernacular creations, such as rock formations and pile dwellings, misses an important historical fact. Not only some of the architects of diamond vaults, Arnold von Westphalen, Peter Heilmann, and Heinrich Hetzel, known by name, there were also important public figures entrusted with key municipal projects and were often employed simultaneously on different sites. As we shall see, the construction of diamond vaults is a collaborative project which involved planners, bricklayers, and plasterers. Far from being anonymous, diamond vaulting is a flexible technique made distinctive in each case by the combined forces of local tradition and the ability and imagination of masons who used it. The structural flexibility of diamond vaults is another important reason for their popularity. The vaults are geometrically complex, but they're easily applied to a variety of spaces. We find them in churches, oratories, corridors, staircases, halls, and cloisters. Their faceted surfaces also appear as a decorative leitmotif on piers, windows, and door embrasures. Arguably, diamond vaults are not only one of the most distinctive, but also one of the most versatile tectonic features created by medieval architects. In order to demonstrate this claim, I propose to consider two regions renowned for their diamond vaults and which are also the focus of the current A exhibition. I hope you had a chance to look at it. The first is the medieval kingdom of Bohemia, now part of the Czech Republic. The second region is that of Gdańsk in northern Poland. The introduction of diamond vaults in Bohemia coincided with the general revival of building activity following decades of destruction and religious unrest. Much of this effort was centered on the court in Prague and was guided by the creative genius of Benedict Reed and by his influential patron, King Vladislav Jagell. Reed's dominant, just to give you a flavor of Benedict Reed's architecture, Reed's dominant artistic influence and unique style may also explain the absence of diamond vaults in Prague. You can see there are virtues of antithesis of what Arno von Westphal was creating in Meissen. However, in the northwest part of the country, rich burghers and aristocracy maintained strong links with the neighbouring Saxony. For them, the architectural opulence of the Meissen court set a new artistic benchmark and provided a number of skilled masons seeking new commissions. The first instance of Bohemian diamond vaults is datable to 1478, only 7 years after the commencement of the work on Albrechtsburg. Unfortunately, their location, the castle at Dubravska Hora, was largely demolished in the 17th century, and the evidence of its original appearance is scarce. A more substantial example is to be found in Homutov, the city ruled by Beneš of Weitmil, who was also the constable of Karlstein Castle and the master of the mint. This powerful man was a staunch supporter of Albrecht Wettin's failed bid for the Bohemian crown, and the appearance of diamond vaults both at Homutov and later at Karlstein reflected their close relationship. Although Beneš died in 1496, the work on his residence, and let's see it, details of it, the work on his residence, which was also a former Teutonic knight's castle, continued into the 1520s under the direction of Hans Schaffer from Eger. A single cell-vaulted room, which you see here on the left and right, is situated on the ground floor, occupied at present by the Municipal Museum, which explains these wonderful little touches on the wall. As in most Bohemian examples, the vault is based on a 4-point star, one in each bay. You can see clearly one, and this is just the 2 prongs of the second star, with a net of small pyramidal cells between them. Here they are. The ridges of each star's arms merge at a single point as they join the wall. You can see them here. The springing points are placed fairly low, and together with the vault's deep projections create a monumental effect disproportionate to the relatively modest size of the room, and I think that's quite clear from Sue's photograph here. The precise function of this space is not recorded, and we can only speculate why diamond vaults were used only there. However, the Colin Luther house, which faces the same square at number 9, hopefully coming here and in the plan, I don't know if this could be focused a little bit, but this is the ground plan and the elevation of various spaces, the external passage and the entrance hall on the left. So Colin Luther House shows how the vaults could be used to distinguish important parts of a wealthy household. Datable to around 1500, diamond vaults decorate ground floor spaces of a 2-story house, and they're, sorry, oh, this is what happened to me after many hours of working on this, I have to say. Maybe it's a different thickness of slides. There usually is something at the top of slide projectors which helps focusing. Ah, much better, thank you. Actually, this is the one that needed sharpening, but perhaps we shouldn't risk it. Anyway, the 3 spaces I'm referring to, this is the passage that you see there. That's the entrance hall, which is this room with a central pillar, and there is one more room which is very difficult to photograph, and you can just see it there. They all have diamond vaults. So the entrance hall there and here, coming into focus, hopefully, soon. Excellent, thank you. So we're talking about this room here, and there it is there. So the entrance hall is vaulted by 4 8-point stars. So 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they have 8 points, supported by a single octagonal column. There it is there. In the adjacent rectangular chamber, this one here,
The low-rising ridges of the vault intersected the apex, creating a dense pattern of overlapping hexagons and curving prisms. And of course, it can look like almost any geometrical figure here, but it is mostly consists of large hexagons, sort of two whole ones and two half hexagons, but they all kind of merge together. But the baffling geometrical complexity reaches its climax in the vaulted passage fronting the house, where the alternating 8 and 4-point stars form the crux of the design. The irregular geometry of the passage folds the structure into an infinite number of triangles and rhomboids. A crucial role is also played by the changing daylight, which can dramatically enhance or reduce the sculpture effect. And the photograph of this passage that you'll see upstairs in the exhibition actually shows how they can become more shallow with a very strong daylight. And this is a photograph taken on a kind of darker, rainy day. The vaults of Chomutov demonstrate not only the richness of geometric thinking behind their designs, but also their ability to confer a sense of imposing monumentality to the simplest and narrowest of spaces. What could be achieved with such success in the confinement of a private house could be developed to an even greater effect in a generous expanse of a church interior. The Franciscan monastery at Bohemia, another nice slide on the left, in southern Bohemia, provides a good example of how large institutional complex could be spatially articulated by its vaults. A Franciscan monastery had existed on that site since the 14th century, but became derelict during the Hussite Wars. In 1490, Bohemia's new patron, Zdislav of Sternberg, initiated a wholesale reconstruction of the foundation, which now housed the Order of Franciscan Observance, favoured by the Bohemia's Catholic aristocracy. The order's charismatic leader, John Capistran, had initiated a Catholic restoration movement in the country some 20 years earlier with a popular preaching tour. The site of his sermon in Kadan in western Bohemia was soon converted into a church and the first seat of observant friars in Bohemia, sponsored by the wealthy Lobkowitz family. Interestingly, 3 of Kadan's rooms have diamond vaults, probably emulating the architecture of their sister house in Saxony. Nevertheless, Kadan's cell vaults are confined to private and isolated spaces, as passage, an oratory, and a large hall, the detail of it on the right, which was possibly used as a chapter house or a scriptorium. At Bohemia, however, the vaults dominate all important parts of the monastery. The only exception is the presbytery, and let me just see. Here is another slightly out of focus plan. This is the ground plan of Bohemia. That's the diamond vaulted nave, and this is a slightly older presbytery, cloister, and some rooms that I'll refer to in a moment just off the cloister. So the only exception to diamond vaults is the presbytery, the first part of the church to be completed, which has a simple triradial net vault, common in Bohemia since the 14th century. In contrast, the nave is a tall, double-aisled hall with 3 columns placed on a longitudinal axis, and slightly to the right of the choir, you can see the 3 columns here and the fact that it's slightly misaligned. The vault consists, this is just a detail of it, of 8 large 4-point stars, 4 in each aisle. So these stars that you can see here, there's 1 there, and they appear here, here, and here. So 4 in each. Very good. So 4 stars in each aisle, in each aisle, which are connected in every direction by small cross-shaped cells. You can see them here and there, and again here, and also on the plan. The cardinal ridges of the vault curve gracefully into the surface of the outer walls and into the smooth shafts of the columns. The entire design is both monumental and easily legible. The deep hollows of diamond cells and the outstretched arms of the stars seem to echo the expansiveness of the interior. As at Colin Luther House at Chomutov, the Bohemia vaults map out the principal areas on the ground floor. The cloister shares the decorative aesthetic of the church. Here's the view of the cloister, so cloister is just this area around here. So it shares the decorative aesthetic of the church, but has a simple vault of interlinking large and small diamonds. The presence of a pulpit in this part may suggest a greater public use of the cloister, which incorporated on its east side a chapel, there it is here, a sacristy, there with its own little window niche, and the chapter house, here, each with their own distinctive variation of the nave vault. Bohemia offered a particularly compelling example how a modern and radically different system of vaulting could transform a traditional hall church. The citizens of a nearby Sobislav followed suit almost immediately, erecting from 1499 diamond vaults over the hall nave of their parish church. The architect in charge, and that's just a detail of Sobislav and view towards the choir. The architect in charge must have been the same person responsible for the Bohemia vaults, for Sobislav is a virtual replica, only with a shorter and lower nave, creating an uneasy junction with a tall chancel arch here. The successful marriage of local building tradition and cutting-edge vault design, combined with the support of the wealthy aristocratic families, ensured the popularity of diamond vaults in Bohemia, a country not known for its traditional building in brick. In the Baltic region, however, the transition was more seamless and therefore its outcome less dramatic. Since the 14th century, the Baltic region was well known for its preference for innovative net and star vault patterns constructed in brick, and this is Lüneburg, St. Nicholas's Church from the 14th century. However, by the end of the 15th century, Eastern Prussia established a direct political link with Saxony when Albrechtsburg's son Friedrich became the Grand Master of the Teutonic Order. In that same year, 1498, Master Matz was put in charge of the new vaults, which included diamond vaults, in the parish church of St. John in Marienburg, the seat of the order. An even earlier example, possibly the first instance of diamond vaults in the region, arrived directly through Franciscan connections. The vault of the narrow window niches in the Franciscan church in Gdansk, here on the plan, there's some window niches here and here, and this is the cloister that I'll refer to in a moment. So these window niches in the Franciscan church in Gdansk can be dated in 1496, when the outer walls were completed. Kaplan dates to this period the rebuilding of the entire monastery, where diamond vaults occupied several important areas. The north wing of the cloister, which I've just shown you here, and which you can see on the slide, the chapter house, the kitchen, and possibly the dining area. The best preserved are the four bays of the cloister, where they form regular 8-point stars whose main transverse ridges rest on diminutive consoles. You can just make them out there in the corner. The master responsible for their construction was himself a priest of the Franciscan order, who, according to the records, arrived with his brothers from the German lands. The introduction of diamond vaults to Gdansk coincided with a building boom that soon gripped the city. At the same time as the Franciscans were setting up their headquarters, several of the town's principal churches and monasteries were undergoing a radical makeover. The dramatic change of scale in the city's topography is best conveyed by the Cathedral of St. Mary, whose 14th century basilica was gradually replaced between 1379 and 1501 by the colossal hall church that we see today. The interior of the church combines spatial monumentality with extreme economy of form, and its austerity, let me just show you a detail of that vault, and its austerity is only countered by the richness of vaulting. Indeed, the vaults, rather than the vast open structure beneath them, give a clear impression of the church's internal structure and liturgical hierarchy. All of St. Mary's vaults are domical in shape, and they rise like individual sails or baldachins over each bay. The size and the shape of the vault closely correspond to the size and position of the bay. Large net vaults, you can see them here, are placed over the crossing and the choir, smaller nets over the choir and transept aisles and the nave. Diamond vaults are relegated to the nave aisles, so here and here, and to the spacious chapels between internal buttresses. But again, the density of the 8-point stars of the south aisle distinguishes it from its northern counterparts, so even the north and the south are different. This compulsive rhythm of geometric variation and repetition, so strikingly apparent in St. Mary's ground plan, is less distinctive inside the church due to its soaring height and the similarity of the star patterns. At a height of 27 meters, the diamond vaults have all but lost their sculpture effect and have become gentle ripples across the surface. Placed alongside the vaults of the nave with their plethora of matchstick ribs, the ribless recesses of diamond vaults appear like their photographic negatives, and I think this photograph captured as very well. Heinrich Hetzel, responsible for the vaults of St. Mary's, became one of the most sought-after architects in Gdańsk, and his vaults in the cathedral were copied in churches across the town. In the roughly coeval church of St. Catherine, diamond vaults are also found only in the side aisles, but at a considerably lower height. The symbolic effect of folded spheres is accentuated by the use of attached or painted stars which cover the joints of the vault ridges. St. Mary's and St. Catherine's exemplify the highly distinctive way in which diamond vaults were used in Prussia. Although they remain more common than in Bohemia, they were never used to the same effect or given the same status as the more popular forms of net and star vaults. With the exception of St. Bridget's in Gdańsk, where the diamond vaults appear over the two choirs, and St. George in Kettingen, which you should see here, where we find them also in the nave, they were relegated to side aisles, towers, porches and chapels, and they never had the same transforming impact on the interiors of the buildings they inhabited. In a region rich in vaulting techniques and familiar with brick, diamond vaults became just one of the many options that architects could choose and which could be added to their repertoire with minimal structural and technical adjustment. Many of Gdańsk's medieval churches were badly damaged in 1945, but their collapsed vaults offered some insight into their construction. The rebuilding of St. Catherine's, which you see in its demolished state on the left and being rebuilt on the right, continued, so the rebuilding continued into the 1970s following the methods used by the medieval builders. Critical for the construction of all diamond vaults were wooden centrings, and you see a drawing by Radova of one of these kind of supporting scaffoldings for the ribs. Centrings for the main ridges could be erected after the outer walls and supporting columns were completed and the building roofed over. A framework of smaller arches could be constructed around them to shoulder the shorter groins, and that's exactly what you see here. This was the crucial phase of the construction, since the scaffolding for the groins created the layout of the entire vault, and it required a close collaboration between the chief architect and the carpenters. Once the centrings were in place, the main ridges could be constructed by laying out the courses of brick, with their edges placed upwards, alternating their short and long sides. And you can read that, I think, in this drawing. The angle between the ridges was commonly 45 degrees, since normal bricks could be used without any additional trimming. In the case of wider vaults, another layer of brick would be added as reinforcement, especially over the transverse arches. It was common for the principal ridges to be built directly into the wall, either at a single point or forked, and I'll show you what I mean by that. This is homotov, you can see the sort of swallows' tails, corbels, and this corbels which are at a point at Sobislav. Although some, of course, were supported by stone or brick consoles or had elaborate stucco fan vault base, which you'll see in a moment. Unlike other more symmetrical forms of vaulting, the height of the springing points of diamond vaults could be easily varied across the interior, a useful device in small, irregularly shaped spaces, such as spiral staircases. This is an example of Olsztyn. You can see they all spring from different points, and it almost seems as if the whole room is moving. The absence of ribs in diamond vaults did not compromise their stability. The curving cells were made stable by the combined forces of thrust, gravity, and mechanical interlocking of bricks, a significantly lighter material than stone. Nevertheless, diamond vaults spanned only relatively small distances. Apart from carpenters and brick and stone masons, The construction of diamond vaults involved plasterers who had the important task in the final stages of creating an even and smooth surface that would cover up any irregularities in the brickwork and would enhance the chiaroscuro effect of the cells. Diamond vaults were usually simply whitewashed, but there is also evidence of painted ornaments and floral patterns. And actually, if you just look carefully, you can see some of these floral patterns, which are actually part of the original design, just at the intersection of the main ridges at the apex of the vault. In Gdańsk, St. Catherine's here again on the left, the joints between ridges were decorated with small star-shaped discs. But the most flamboyant decoration is to be found among the last examples of diamond vaults to be built in Bohemia and Moravia. In the houses in Slavonice, which you see on the left, Telč, Jindřichův Hradec and Znojmo, pendant bosses were added to the vault, similar to those you've seen in Peter Parler's design. There's one there. Supported in Slavonice by stucco fan vault bases, these here. Dating to the 1540s and 1550s, these buildings belong to a new strand of Czech diamond vault design, closely connected with Lower Austria. There we find a new tendency exemplified by this castle chapel in Breiteney, to soften the angular forms of diamond vaults, combining them with petal-like shapes reminiscent of Benedict Reed's and Anton Pilgrim's designs. Across the border in the Moravian town of Slavonice, this feature combined with a suspended keystone became the basis of an extraordinary composite designs. Under the direction of the resident mason Leopold Estreicher, 3 houses facing the lower square, numbers 25, 45 and 46, and you see here on the ground plans for 25 and house number 45. So these 3 houses were all decorated with exquisite vaults. Number 25, which you see on the left and here on the plan, at the southwest of the square, is entered through a handsome hall with 4 8-point stars, each featuring a ball-shaped pendant boss. The elongated rhomboids of the stars taper outwards into triradial cells, whose main ridges spring from the simple consoles decorated with mason's monograms. And there they are here. They're very small and they all bear marks of Leopold Estreicher. Visually, the entire vault seems balanced on a single octagonal pier and its square, heavily imposted capital. The cramped space of the staircase in number 45, which you can see only here on the ground plan, but which faces the same square, could not accommodate such ambitious design. Nevertheless, the sense of expansive roundness is conveyed here not only by the 3 pendant bosses here, but also by the supporting ridges which fan out from the small cylindrical corbels. You can just see them there. In the vaults of the next door house, number 46, and hopefully the plan, maybe the plan is coming later, never mind. That composition was taken to its natural conclusion. The rectangular entrance is spanned by 4 large fans, you can see one of them here, uncannily reminiscent of similar English designs, and crowned by 2 suspended keystones, one partially obscured by a larger coffered window arch, which is contemporary here, and there's another pendant boss just there. Let me just see the plan. No, it's not coming. This final blossoming of diamond vaults in Slavonice shows them at their most imaginative and eclectic, and with a sense for theatrical decorum not seen since their first appearance at Albrechtsburg. The architect was able to overcome spatial limitations by bringing together Central European Gothic, Italian Renaissance, and even English-looking perpendicular elements, without any apparent contradiction. The result was the most compelling of interior designs, worthy of a self-respecting wealthy burgher. The Slavonice group confirms the notion that the uniqueness of diamond vaults lay not in their technical innovation or structural order, but in their distinctive visual aesthetic and their overwhelming effect on interiors. The transforming power of diamond vaults meant that they were never conceived or perceived as an elegant backdrop, but as a meaningful part of spatial composition. But what exactly did they mean to the people who built them? Why were they chosen for certain spaces and not others? Was there a hierarchy of vaulting or a definable diamond vault iconography conveyed through its abstract forms or by its decoration? At close inspection, any strict categorization of diamond vaults fails. Their form of versatility is matched only by their functional plurality. Although originally a secular form, cell vaults appear equally effectively and often simultaneously in religious settings. In churches, they're frequently relegated to liturgically inferior parts, naves and aisles, in the same way that groin vaults had been in earlier architecture. But there are many important instances where they're found only in the choir and above altars. Clearly, in both secular and religious settings, the intention was often to highlight places of distinction. In castles and patrician houses, these were usually the more accessible public rooms on the ground floor, as for example in the Colin Luther house in Homoto. But at the same time, we find them in narrow, undistinguished passages and tower staircases. In many examples, their existence seems to be related to some particular patronal use, but often that function is ambivalent and opaque. We can also wonder what special distinction had to be accorded to the working parts of monasteries, cloisters, kitchens, scriptoria, where diamond vaults regularly appear. Attempts to connect diamond vaults with particular religious order, the Teutonic Knights in the north and the Franciscan observance in Bohemia, have also proved problematic. A close association of any order with the new vaulting style could not account for their appearance in several Lithuanian Orthodox churches. You see here a ground plan of Marmozhekov, or in the choir of the parish church in Tabor on the right, which was the seat of the Hussite movement in Bohemia. Perhaps more meaning could be gleaned from the original decoration of diamond vaults, which is now largely lost, but may have once constituted an important part of the internal iconography. Diamond vaults do not lend themselves readily to figurative and narrative painting, and I think you can see why just by looking at this kind of structure. As we have seen, the rare surviving examples employ mostly painted floral ornaments, highlighted ridges, or attached stars. In a secular context, painted or engraved coats of arms and other heraldic devices identified and commemorated the patron. A different kind of commemoration was provided by a number of uncovered masons' initials and dates, denoting vaults as singular works of design worthy of the artist's signature. But mostly the prismatic cells were left white in order to enhance their optical effect. In the absence of any substantive decoration, it would appear that aesthetic quality resided principally in the pure form of the vaults themselves. Regardless of their size, complexity, or location, in each case, the design of the vaults involves some thinking about how the whole interior is shaped through a correlation of its geometry, spatial composition, and support system. Diamond vaults had the ability visually to integrate or compartmentalize interiors, to make them to appear to expand or to diminish them. They could add an element of playful irregularities to symmetrical spaces, and conversely could harmonize oddly shaped interiors. And this is very oddly shaped passage in a house in Kremnica in Slovakia. An important dimension was added by the effect of light, whether natural or artificial, which had the power to enhance their plasticity. Structure and texture, the two defining elements of diamond vault design, are also responsible for their enduring appeal. These qualities have captured the imagination of modern architects many centuries after the last diamond vaults were erected. On an elementary level, the inspiration could take the form of neo-Gothic revival, exemplified by the vaults of, now it's like leap forward, here's a plan of Slavonice, but we don't need it anymore, by the vaults of Collegium Novum in Krakow, constructed in 1886. This kind of historicizing approach was fully in keeping with the city's celebrated medieval past and with the college's status as the oldest university in Poland. At the same time, the abstract shapes of diamond vaults gave the building a touch of eye-catching modernity appropriate for an educational institution for creative young minds. On a more conceptual level, diamond vaults undoubtedly informed the radical creations of Josef Hochol and his circle, who were active in Prague in the first decades of the 20th century. Their houses and villas, erected in the suburb of Vyshegrád between 1911 and 1914, incorporated bold faceted shapes, resulting in crystalline and strangely unsettling elevations. And I give you here an example of a block of flats in Neklanova Street. In one instance, they act as a visual pun on the word diamond, we can hopefully make out there, on an entrance to the shop of that name. The style of Hochol, Janak, Gottschalk and Hoffmann was partly a reaction against traditionalism and conservatism of contemporary architecture. However, the abstract visual vocabulary of their structures was already a part of the Czech architectural heritage, nor was it solely connected with the Cubist movement. As late as 1968, the winning entry for the reconstruction of the West Tower of the 14th century Emmaus Monastery were František Černy's controversial Angel's Wings, whose concrete gables bear more than a passing resemblance to the overlapping ridges of a diamond vault. We have seen that the development of diamond vaults in the course of 80 years was not characterized by a variation of any particular form or design, whether locally devised or imported, but by a more fundamental interest in spatial geometry, internal dynamics, and purely decorative or sculptural effects. More than 5 centuries after Albrechtsburg, geometry and innovation, integrated into an expressive architectural language, continue to unite architects across the historical spectrum. That, however, is a story for another occasion and possibly a subject for a future project. Thank you.
Somebody like to ask a question, perhaps? Yep.
Within a certain specific city, was there often a common builder who would do most of the works within that city? Or were there separate builders and masons for each project? And I was also wondering if they could reuse the centering in any cases, or if they always rebuilt all the timber frames.
The second question might be easy to answer. I think they had to be dismantled every time, so although the material might be used, I think different dimensions require different kinds of centering, so I can't quite see them really completely recycled. As for the architects, actually we do have quite a lot of, as I suggested at the beginning, quite a lot of these names are recorded. But it really is very much a collaborative project in each case, so there's several people, and quite often the chief architect comes and goes and works on, supervises several projects in the area, or quite often in different, totally different cities. I mean, Bohemia and Soběslav are quite interesting because they're clearly copying, or Soběslav is copying Bohemia, and one could suspect that the same architect worked in both places, but his name, strangely enough, is not recorded. We have a lot of names for bricklayers and people who otherwise had to be paid monthly for their services. There are some principal architects like Arno von Westphalen, who was very active in the Meissen area and Saxony generally. But you know, they will not be responsible for the project throughout. They would again just appear or devise the plan and then set the kind of project in motion. So I think there are some kind of critical figures leading the project, but I think it's very much a sort of, as building always is, I think, collaboration of many different people.
I was quite interested when we were looking at the actual brick construction, because I was originally getting lost what happens when you take all the plaster, what happens when you take all the plaster off, what do you actually see? But some of them were incredibly intricate, and I can't quite see how the brickwork actually would be constructed to get those very sharp edges when it's much more intricate.
Yes. I said that most of the time what they're trying to do is to create these joints at sort of 45 degrees because that's the normal shape of the brick. However, of course, there's a lot of trimming going on, and they do trim the brick a lot. They're trying to avoid that because that's wastage, and they try not to waste your material. But they obviously have to be trimmed because they really sort of reduced to a very sharp or needle sharp sort of point as they merge with the wall occasionally. So of course they need to, but you can do that. Brick is a soft material and you can actually do that more easily than you can with stone. So it's more flexible in that. And there are some stone diamond vaults, but they're very, very few. So brick helped, I think, in that sense. Yes, I think so. There's a microphone.
I don't need the mic. I want to see you, well, sort of get you to say a little bit more about painted decoration. And I've got a nasty feeling this question has clauses and sub-clauses. You've established the fact that we've got diamond vaults in both secular and ecclesiastical buildings. So I'm not particularly bothered about the secular buildings. That's a category which I'm not concerned about with this question. But if you don't have paint in a medieval church, and particularly an important medieval church, it's not just the vaulting design which is going to be startlingly different, it's going to be startlingly austere. Now, I suspect that vaults were generally painted, and they can be painted very differently indeed in the late Middle Ages, sometimes with very heavy all-over paint, and sometimes with, as you say, quite delicate occasional floral patterns. Do you really think that important vaults, diamond vaults in important churches would have been unpainted, and so have, as I say, the absolute contrast of plainness, almost alien to a medieval culture?
Yes, but these are quite alien structures, and I think they're different in every sense. And I think that this notion of pure form is very important. They're decorative. Their form is decorative. They don't need additional surface decoration. They're the kind of decoration in themselves. I think that's how I see it. But that's not to exclude possibilities of some painted decoration in some of them. But we really don't have evidence of that, and there seems to be consistency. I mean, a lot of, as you know, there are a lot of these late medieval vaults that survive, and Bohemia choir has painted coats of arms between these sort of triradial networks. That's quite a common feature. But it's really rather strange that all these surviving diamond vaults that we have in major churches are actually very austere and plain, undecorated. I don't think that's just to do with loss. I think it's really how they were. I think this fits into another point, general point about this austerity, especially of hall church architecture in Bohemia, which is something that starts in the 14th century, the kind of simplicity of their design. And I think this new form, when it appeared, fitted that bill very, very well. And maybe that's why they were so popular in Bohemia. I mean, I've just shown 2 or 3 examples. There are dozens of examples. They're congregated in certain areas, but there are many more than I've shown. And I think there is this compatibility between this likeness for simple hall interiors in Bohemian architecture and this kind of abstract design on top of them.
I wonder if you can deal with another worry, which is, as you say, they have a good deal of appeal to a 20th century eye, certainly to a modern 20th century eye. And you tell me, is there a chance that there's been restoration, let us say, in the early part of the 20th century, in a number of cases, removing what is unattractive to an early 20th century eye, in other words, painted decoration, and revealing the form, which would once again be of appeal to a 20th century?
Not really. I mean, some of these, like Slavonice, which I think are absolute gems. I mean, they're now part of the UNESCO heritage, but they're private houses where people lived, and they were totally forgotten, most of these things. Maybe the major churches, but I haven't found any evidence for any kind of major restoration work. In fact, most of them are being restored now. I think that, yes, so I don't think that really has influence. What is important in this kind of connection that I made right at the end is that this was part of the sort of national heritage, just as perpendicular style is for England, and if you're choosing style to rebuild your national parliament, you look at what is kind of considered to be most symbolic of the institution you're creating. So I think that's something, that there is something there, but I don't know, I haven't come across any evidence of sort of stripping down interiors. But there's a very good point, Barry, thank you.
I was wondering, can you say a few words about the economics of diamond vaults relative to traditional vaulting in terms of materials and the type of labor, and also
again, if I start from the end of your question, this is a very interesting point because, of course, what we have with diamond vaults, which is rather unusual in medieval context, we have a sort of specific or more or less specific date, a person, a place, and a patron, and they're all documented. So you can really pinpoint the origins of diamond vaults from the outset. This is not really easily done with other kinds of medieval vaulting because the process was far longer. But who exactly, did Arnold of Westphalen say to Albrechtsburg, look, I've got this brilliant new idea, shall we try it out? Because they appear all over the palace. Did they try it? I mean, they first seem to have been built in the lower parts, in a sort of area where they're mostly cellars. But nonetheless, this was planned, the outer walls, the inner structure, the vaults must have been planned somehow together. So who came up with this idea of trying to do, this is, again, one of these situations which is impossible without specific documents to ascertain. As for the economics, I don't have any sums, but brick, the labour involved in creating brick and cutting brick is I think cheaper because it's easier to do than stone. So from that point of view, it's cheaper. Nevertheless, in these first instances, they use stone ribs, so there is some stone work involved in the design. They leave them very quickly, but there seems to be some kind of collaboration again between people working in stone and brick, and then carpenters and plasterers. But even with other types of vaulting, I think you have to have several, different kinds of people, a large number of men generally, depending on the size of the building. Some scholars have tried to argue that resistance to diamond vaults in some parts of Central Europe were connected with this resistance of lodges to give in, so the stonemasons didn't want to give their work over to bricklayers. But actually that shows very little understanding how medieval architecture works, because a lot of these people were very capable of working any of these materials, and I think we may find that they were the same people. They just picked up new tricks, or needed a good carpenter to help them lay out, or somebody to show them by working on another site, and then they were able to reproduce them. Because there's such an enormous number of these vaults, in these never heard of places, or for me at least, I apologize for everybody from Lithuania, but I never heard of them. This can't be directly connected to Meissen. It has to be some longer chain of itinerant artists, architects, going around and offering their services. So economically, perhaps it sort of boosted medieval architecture at the end of the 15th and early 16th century. But I don't have any evidence they were necessarily expensive. My bet is they were probably cheaper to do. And it's a very long answer, sorry. Please.
Is there any evidence of them, any acoustics being done back then? In terms of anechoic chambers or echo chambers, is it noticeable when you go into a space like that as opposed to a barrel vault, the difference in the acoustics and space?
Well, I tend to try. I've never heard one thing I've never done in a diamond vaulted church, I never sung inside. But I think probably the barrel vaulted churches are probably more acoustic, but I don't have any proof for that. That would be interesting to know whether these sort of faceted forms regulate the way the sound is distributed around church. I think that would be because most of these churches actually, both Sobislav and Bohemia, have a gallery at the back. So you can, there's obviously a kind of choir or something was used musically, but I don't have any evidence for the acoustic effect. It's very good. Should try that.
Any more? Just a little quick one, picking up on the mention of sort of do we have any information about contracts? Do we have any contemporary documents which tell us how these vaults were described at the time?
No. No. They're just called vaults. I have to confess that I haven't got every single document available. But the ones that have been published, they're just, because in Sobislav actually we have a full set of documents from Sobislav, but they talk about construction of the vaults in the name, because we know that they're diamond vaults, so we can link the documents in it, but no, they don't call them, no. That would be very interesting, returning to our earlier conversation about terminology, how to call them.
Was a diamond shop, wasn't it? So
that's
they were
right,
all
exactly.
diamonds at that time.
Absolutely, by that stage the connections being made that this, mean, obvious sort of connection between stones, gems, and these kind of faceted shapes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
Zoe.
you for your
This was
attention
very
and
nice.
patience.